Hello, and welcome to Radical Engagements here at Vlog, and we continue our reading of JudgeSabo's long breakdown of unauthority. And we're going to get to it. We first have to go through Sabo's basically line by line breakdown of what might be meant. Now, I haven't agreed with everything asserted here. You should go back and check episodes 1 through 3, where I have minor disagreements. But so far, I'm in the main in agreement with Zebo. Okay, so let's get going. All right, part 5, subsection, the authority of machines, I believe. Long quote from Engels. The automatic machinery of the big factory is more despotic than the small capitalist who employ workers ever have been, at least in regards to the hours of work one may write upon the portals of these factories. La castier ogni anomia voce entre, leave ye enter in all autonomy behind. If man, by dint of his knowledge and inventive genius, has subdued the forces of nature, the latter avenge themselves upon him by subjecting him, insofar that he employs them, to the veritable despotism independent of all social organization. Wanting to abolish all authority in large-scale industry is tantamount to wanting to abolish industry itself, to destroy the power loom in order to return to the spinning wheel. In this section, we can see how emphatically Engels believes that it really is the machinery itself which acts as an authority over the worker, rather than with rather intense and shocking language. He claims that the factory is even more despotic over the workers than small capitalists. This might be him contrasting handicraft labor under petit bourgeois to factory labor, but workers have hardly had control over their schedules even in that situation either. Alternatively, the small capitalist here could be meant to contrast with the big factory, for he has pointed how the capitalist authority over scheduling is subordinate to the requirements of the factory. He claims the authority of the factory here is meant to be so complete over the hours of work that the workers are told to leave all autonomy behind. Engels even invokes Dante's Inferno and the infinite words above the doors to hell. Abandon all hope, ye who enter here. It is shocking that Engels, apparently intended to defend authority, goes out of his way to compare his ideal system to workers being damned. He describes the factory as the nature of avenging itself against mankind. Engels doubles down on his comparison to hell and presents this authority as not even neutral, but actively hostile to the well-being of workers. Asterisk. This is Engels' Nick Land moment. An asterisk. I didn't even notice how despotic this could be read. He also actively identifies the forces of nature being employed here in large-scale industry as veritable despotism which exists independent of all social organization. Authority here is being attributed to physical machinery. Asterisk, and I'm sure Sabo's going to point this out, this is completely incompatible with Engels' own definition of what authority can be, because it requires will. Machines don't have will. Unless you're an animist, and Engels is not. Since the tyranny exists independent of all social organization, being generated by the very physical form and function of the factory, it can only be ended with the destruction of large-scale industry itself. One could easily read everything here as a part of a Luddite or primitivist text. Yeah, this would easily come out of John Saracen's mouth, telling the workers that only their escape is to burn the factory to the ground. Engels seems to intend the exact opposite effect, presenting the idea of destroying the power loom as an absurdity. Part 6. Another long quote from Engels. Let us take for another example the railway. Here, too, the cooperation of infinite number of individuals is absolutely necessary, and this cooperation must be practiced during the precise fixed hours so that no incident may happen. Here, too, the first condition of the job is a dominant will that settles all subordinate questions. Whose will? What will? Engels? Anyway. Whether this will is represented by a single delegate or a committee charged with the execution of the resolutions of the majority of persons interested. In either case, there is very pronounced authority. Moreover, what would happen to be the first train dispatched if the authority of the railway employees over the honorable passengers were abolished? But the necessity of authority, and the imperious authority at that, will nowhere be more found evident than on board the ship on the high seas. There, in times of danger, the lives of all depend on instantaneous and absolute obedience to all the will of one. Except they don't, dude. It's just not true. Anyway, back to JudgeSabo. As we noted, Engels' argument applies to any sort of activity that requires combined action. The social dynamic seems to be like an essential part of his understanding of authority. This is combined here what he considers to be two cases of authority outside of the factory, which require combined action: a railway and a ship at sea. Engels indicates that the railways need authority in two ways: one, administrative needs, such as scheduling, similar to the cotton mill; and two, the authority of the railway employees, employed by whom, over passengers. The first point is essentially the same as what we saw with the cotton mill. The only difference, which was indicated previously, is that Engels dropped the possibility of schedules being determined by majority vote and introduced the idea of things being determined by a committee of delegates instead of a single delegate. The authority of workers over passengers is less clear, as Engels only gestures towards the idea in a single sentence. Engels seems to be taking his meaning as self-evident when it is not. Passengers do not seem to be engaged in any kind of combined action with the workers. Perhaps Engels is taking the ways that the passengers need to behave to avoid interfering with the workers, aka boarding and departing on schedule, respecting worker-only areas, etc. We are forced to guess. Engels then considers the ship at the high seas, where he emphasizes a clear need for imperious authority in times of danger. But really, this is just the same kind of need in the cotton mill or the railway, except with the added context of a life-threatening emergency to add to its import. Administrators need to direct the workers to do different jobs to address a moment of crisis. Engels might be said to have identified three forms of authority he believes are necessary in socialism. One, the authority of necessary administrative tasks; two, the authority of workers over non-workers in the workplace; and three, the imperious authority needed in times of danger. However, the third form seems to reduce to the first, and the second isn't elaborated on. So, if we can't see if it's really different or not. The vast majority of attention must be focused on the first form. The mechanism for exactly how the authority is imposed is not considered in these examples. The mere fact that people need to coordinate is proof enough that there is authority there, since they are acting in concert. These same combination examples, factory, railway, ship, can be seen in Engels' letters to Marx's son, Par Lafarge, on December 30th, 1871, months before On Authority was written. Long quote from Engels' letter to Par Lafarge. Par Lafarge, Par Lafogue, I don't know. Our friends in Spain will realize the way in which these gentry misuse the word authoritarian. Rather, the Bakuninists take to dislike something they say is authoritarian, and they believe by doing so they damn it forever and aye. If, instead of being bourgeois, journalists, and so forth, were the working man, or if they had only devoted some study to economic questions and modern industrial conditions, they would know that no communal action is possible without submission on part of some to an external will. That is to say, an authority. Whether it be the will of the majority of others, of the managing committee, or of one man alone, it is inevitably a will imposed upon dissidents. But without a single controlling will, no cooperation is possible. That's also not true, dude. Just try and get one of Barcelona's big factories to focus without control, that is to say, without authority. Or to run a railway without knowing for certain that every engineer, stoker, etc., is at the post exactly when he ought to be. I should very like to know whether good Bakunin would entrust his portly frame to a railway carriage if the railway was administered on the principle that no one needs to be at their post unless they choose to submit to the authority of the regulations. Regulations far more authoritarian in any conceivable state of society than those of the Congress of Basel. Of Basel. Anyway. All these grandiloquent, ultra-radical, and revolutionary catchphrases serve only to conceal the abysmal paucity of ideas and an abysmal ignorance of the conditions under which daily life in society takes place. This try abolishing all authority, even by consent, among sailors on board of a ship. Similar points can be found in Engels' letter to Theodore Cuno on January 24th, 1872. Quote, now so, according to Bakunin, the international is not to be formed for a political struggle, but in order that it may replace the old state organization as soon as social liquidation takes place. It follows that it must never come near as possible as Bakuninist ideal of society of the future. In this society, there will be, above all, no authority, for authority equals state equals absolute evil. How these people propose to run a factory, work a railway, or steer a ship without having, in last resort, one deciding will, without unified direction, they do not indeed tell us. The authority of the majority over the minority also ceases. Every individual and every committee and community is autonomous, but as to how a society, even that of only two people, is possible unless he gives up some autonomy, Bakunin remains silent. This section demonstrates a few things. Firstly, it shows Engels had these examples in mind several months before On Authority was ever written, and meant for it to be a critique of Bakunin specifically as a representative of the anti-authoritarian socialists in general. This is even mixed in with some post-journal attacks, such as denouncing Spanish workers as being bourgeois or journalists instead of being workers. Keep in mind, Engels was the son of a textile factory owner, and Marx was a journalist, or insults about Bakunin's weight. It also demonstrates that Engels thinks authority is necessary even in a society of two people. One interpretation I had considered while writing this is that Engels believes authority was only necessary for organizing large groups or required some formal organization. These readings appear to be ruled that out here. In Engels' mind, any two people doing any activity require their cooperation requires one of them to oppose themselves and subordinate the other. Part 7, long quote from Engels. When submitted these arguments, like those to the most rabid anti-authoritarians, the only answer that they were able to give me was the following: yes, that's true, but it is not the case that authority we consider on our delegates, but the commission entrusted. These gentlemen think that when they have changed their names of things, they have changed the things themselves. This is how profound thinkers mock the whole of the world. This is one of the most frequently cited portions of On Authority, but its argument is rather lacking. Agreed. Engels spares a single sentence to present what anarchist counter-argument might look like. The unnamed anarchist concedes that Engels is right, that the combined action may require certain delegates deciding administrative tasks, such as creating a schedule. They do not concede that the delegate has any authority, and instead that they have been commissioned by the workers with the task as one of the duties they need to divide up amongst themselves. Engels does not provide enough detail to know exactly how the anarchist is distinguishing these things. In fact, this lack of detail becomes the basis of his critique against the anarchist. Engels replies that the anarchist is merely changing the name of things rather than pointing to any material difference. If the anarchist has agreed to a strict definition of authority and agrees that everything here fits that definition, then arbitrarily calling it a different thing is not a real objection. This reply only works if anarchists really do define authority in the same way Engels does, and as we've shown, both Sabo and I, Engels is not consistent in his own definition, and really cannot point to any distinguishing features. If they are not able to provide any materially distinct definition, or if they are able to describe how socialist administrations are not imposed, then Engels' reply does not work. The anarchists would not think that they are changing the thing itself by changing its name. Rather, they are pointing to the difference in the thing itself as the basis for giving it a different name. Since Engels provides so little detail here, it is hard to see the objection and response as little more than a argument. The anarchist accuses Engels of applying the same name to two different things, and Engels replies that the anarchist is applying two names to the same thing. Engels does not present the anarchist side as having any more substance than this, and he responds equally with little substance. Yeah, we call that a straw man, children. Engels and Marx are given to this. Their stuff on utopian socialists is often given to this too, and they ignore how they actually meet some of their own criterion they spell out. Part 8, long quote from Engels. We thus have seen, on one hand, a certain authority, no matter how delegated, and on the other hand, a certain subordination, are things which, independently of all social organization, are imposed upon us together with material conditions under which we produce and make products circulate. We have seen besides that material conditions of production and circulation inevitably develop with large-scale industry, and that large-scale agriculture and increasingly tend to enlarge the scope of his authority. Asterisk, yeah, this is Whiggish. Hence, it is absurd to speak of the principle of authority as being absolutely evil. I mean, it's absurd to refer to anything as being absolutely evil, but whatever. And of the principle of autonomy as being absolutely good. Authority and autonomy are relative things whose spirits vary with the various phases of development of society. You will notice that they use development of society Whiggishly here. If autonomists confine themselves to saying that social organization of the future would restrict the authority solely on the limits within the certain conditions of production render inevitable, we could understand each other. but they are blind to all facts that make things necessary and passionately fight the world. Engels concludes this section with a summary, reaffirming his own position. He emphasizes two main points. One, the material conceptions of production found in modern large-scale production impose with it some form of personal authority upon the workers. And two, the further development of large-scale industry develops the scope of the authority along with it. Because of this, Engels believes that anarchists rejecting authority as an absolute evil and therefore endorsing its opposite, autonomy, as an absolute good is absurd. Because they accept combined action and because they embrace large-scale industry, they must therefore also accept the authority that comes with it. This is not to say that Engels believes the opposite either, treating authority as an absolute good and autonomy as an absolute evil. We see this same framing of anarchism in Engels' letter to Kuno, and against this, Engels adopts the view that both can be good in their appropriate spheres. These spheres can also change over time and with certain developments, such as the sphere of authority growing as large-scale industry grows. It is worth highlighting this portion as it is the closest thing to any discussion of morality within an authority. We see the latter, with some interpreted this essay as a critique of anarchist stance as moralizing, in contrast to Engels' superior method of scientific socialism. But to the extent that Engels has an issue with the framework, it does not seem to be with calling something good or evil. Rather, he has an issue with them being treated as absolute goods or evils, which he gives an alternative of viewing as relative goods and evils according to these changing spheres that depend upon the development of society. Asterisk. A lot of Marxist moralizing actually is just a reframing. That makes people uncomfortable, though. Against the anarchist condemnation of authority, Engels offers what he believes to be a more accurate stance. Socialism does not abolish authority, but instead restricts it to certain limits by the conditions of production. That this is presented almost as a compromise. Engels wants to emphasize here that if these socialists are opposed to authority, they can get most of what they want. Socialism will get rid of authority as far as possible, reducing it down to the minimum level that it makes necessary. But alas, there are blind to all facts, unable to compromise or be brought to reason, and refuse to recognize this minimal authority, which is admittedly expanding as production develops towards combined action. Yeah, that's the problem. Engels' Whiggish view earlier actually makes this argument really thin. Anyway, it's interesting that Engels presents authority as only existing in production, apparently disappearing in all other areas of life. He appears to do this because in the next section he gives a major example of how society has changed in this regard, the disappearance of the political authority of the state. But why only consider the two areas? Engels here has presented an argument so that anytime there is combined action, even in a society of only two people, according to his letter to Kuno, there will be authority. There must be a ruling will, combined with the action can be used in non-productive areas, though, and is indeed in these areas of play. Suppose, for example, a group of friends want to play a tabletop role-playing game which requires 2 or more players. Anyone who has tried to organize this knows how difficult scheduling a session can be. So Engels' argument about combined action in the factory seems to equally be applicable here. Why does Engels not say that we must, quote, play at hours fixed by the authority of D&D Player's Handbook, which cares nothing for the individual autonomy? The same point could be made about a birthday party, a game of baseball, a romantic evening between 2 lovers, and so on. It seems like the same logic would hold, but Engels has not made any room for authority in socialism outside of production. It is ironic that for Engels, in defense of authority, seems to underestimate how necessary it would be in socialism, supposing we really accept his conception of authority. Or perhaps it doesn't. We just are unable to tell why Engels has insufficiently described what authority and impose mean. If Engels really meant something like the second interpretation of impose, I suggest, where any disagreement between wills, where one gets one's their way counts, there is no reason such disagreement would not appear in all other areas of social life. Engels' argument about material conditions of production needing to be combined was ultimately unnecessary. If he doesn't mean this in the sense of impose, though, it's unclear why authority is required in a society of 2 people. And we see here how Engels has gotten himself into kind of a trap, which is one of the things that I was trying to point out. That's beyond his assumption of teleological development being linear and almost Whiggish, which bugs me apparently more than it bugs JudgeSabo, but Sabo has pointed it out as well. It's also that his definitions, when you really parse them, don't entirely work. And he's carving out exceptions that don't make sense given the examples he's given. That's a problem, and it's a big problem. So that leaves us with a lot, and we have a lot more to cover in this. But we're going to stop here for the day. Like and subscribe. Remember, I have a Patreon. $3 will get you access to all kinds of audio for things that I don't normally release for free. $5 will get you additional video as well. $10 will have you be able to set tone. There's also Q&As, etc. behind the paywall. Share this if you don't want to join the Patreon. I understand, unless you hate my guts, and that's fine too. Enjoy a cup of tea, like and subscribe, hit the bell, and have a great day.